Scott, Nancy, how we doing today?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, doing good.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys taking the time to sit down and I guess dive into one of my biggest struggles, and I'm sure it's something that a lot of people struggle with, the whole idea of relationships.
Yeah, you're not alone in that struggle for sure.
No, we were both there as well, right? It's an ongoing journey of learning about relationships, and really it's the relationship with ourselves that we start to really get focused on so that the other relationships in our life start changing and having different outcomes.
Yeah, and I know that through the path that I've walked, it's been a bit of a mess and a bit distorted where for a long time I walked around looking for the value that somebody else gave me.
Mm.
And I feel like a lot of us do that. We kind
And
of we look for that outside satisfaction because going inward is a little bit scary. It's a little bit hard.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it for sure can be scary. For me, I believe the outcomes have been well worth the the investigation of self. Um, we hear a lot from clients about in the beginning of their relationship journey, it's about oh, I want to find that person who completes me. I want to find that person that makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of the matter is that there's nobody out there. There's nobody coming, and there's nobody that's going to do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
We have to find that happiness within ourselves, and then find a partner that complements us
Mm-hmm.
in that realm.
Yeah.
I love the way you put that because as I'm navigating through the path and kind of, I guess, trying to explore that dating thing here and there, I'm finding a lot of that where it's like, a lot of people walk around with, you'll complete me, and not afraid to go inward. And then when I've gone through that journey of discovering what makes me me and what makes me tick, trying to find somebody that connects with that is, I'm finding a very difficult challenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the rule book has been rewritten.
There's a rule book.
Well, I think we all have like that play by play book that we live by, kind of like if X, Y, and Z fits into whatever the picture is. But then when we navigate into like this new realm, it's like we don't really know what that playbook looks like at all. So you almost want to, I guess, default and go back to those same old habits.
Mm-hmm.
But then you realize that when you do that, you're going to get the same old results. So you steer the other direction, and it becomes really swampy, I guess, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think for me in my journey, it was about finding the rules
Mm-hmm.
uh, that I wanted to play by,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the exercises, if you will, that we use with our clients is a 3-column list, and it's a really great tool for getting real clarity around what our rules are for this journey of life and relationship. And I wouldn't agree with you more about our habits and patterns, right?
Right.
If we see, for me in my relationship journey, I was always the cheater or being cheated on, right? It went both ways in my relationships. And I kept looking at that, like, failed relationship after failed relationship, of like, what are they doing wrong? Why can't they do this? Why they should be this way? It should, right? And it really came back to self, and realizing that my habits and my patterns of not communicating, not being vulnerable, not being authentic, those were the patterns and habits that I brought into these relationships. That, look, if and it doesn't matter if it's an intimate relationship or my buddies or the guys at work or anything, if I'm not authentically me, how can I expect anybody to get to know the person I want them to like or love?
Hmm. Well, and I think that's where, a lot of the rules we adopt tend to, for ourselves, it's almost like they're about who do we have to be for the person to like us, right? A lot of people feel like, and we don't even realize we're doing it so much, but say you come across someone you find attractive, or you find someone you like, a lot of people start kind of changing who they are, hoping that the person's going to like them, right? And that's kind of the rules we start to live by. And when we throw that rule book out the window and instead really tap into the authentic you, right? Whoever that is, being you in any situation, anything that life calls for, that's what attracts in the person who's going to come in and complement that, right? Because if we start pretending to be something for somebody, it's very short-lived, right? It's going to eventually show its true colors as we get into relationships. And that's why on both ends, people get confused when you get into the relationship, because it's like, it only lasts so long, you holding up that end of your bargain.
Facade.
Yeah, the facade.
Right.
And then the other person's like, well, I thought you were this way, right? And you start to, your true self just starts to show itself at times, or you get so disgruntled because you're trying so hard to be something you're not, right? It just creates conflict and confusion and eventually a divide that ends the relationship, because no one was really being their authentic self. So there wasn't a genuine attraction in the first place.
No, see, it makes me think about this article that I started working on today about comparing the idea of land capacity as far as the conservation idea goes. There's a set amount of there's the mathematical stuff you put in that ends up building this criteria around how many how many animals can actually live in any given parcel before there's, illness or starvation or whatever it is, before the land just can't carry the capacity that's out there. And that's kind of how the hunting regulations come together. And I think about it on an internal aspect where we're going through this idea of a relationship, whether it's a friendship, an intimate relationship, whatever it is. And those things end up bubbling over because there's only so much that we can do in order to project what we think it is that somebody wants. I guess in a way, we're kind of hiding that authentic version of ourselves. And when that happens, those relationships end up becoming toxic. They degenerate very, very quickly. And then you're kind of left back at square one where you're looking in the mirror going, that didn't work out because I don't even know who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, you're not alone, right? We've both been there. We work with people each and every day that are in that space or climbing out of that space. And that's the real difference between a toxic relationship and an enlightened relationship, is simply the fact that we take off the masks, that we get to that authentic self first. After my last relationship before Nancy, I took 3.5 years off of dating, of one night stands, of all of it, because I really got to that point of, I was tired of it. I was tired of trying to be everything that I needed to be to have this person like me. And all that came down to in the very end was that I felt like I wasn't lovable. I felt like I wasn't enough to be with that person. And that idea, that story that I ran in my cage of the mind and over again, that I was unlovable, led me, right? That belief created the actions and the things that I did, the habits and patterns I had in my relationship. So when I discovered why I had that belief, why did I believe I was unlovable? When I found that, it was incredibly opening to my heart space to be able to finally put down those masks, to take off that suit of armor, if you will, and really create friendships, not look for the date, not look for the girlfriend.
Mm.
And, I had never really had women as friends. There was always an ulterior motive for me. And so as I began to peel those layers back and drop those masks and really come home to self, right? Find who Scott really was. What are the things that really light me up? And developing a new mindset, an adventurous mindset, if you will, and then bringing that into the world, it was a completely different game.
Well, and I like that you touch on ulterior motive, right? Because I think when we're living in that space of an unconscious relationship, we all are going after an ulterior motive, whether it, we can call it sex, we can call it whatever it is, but it's actually deeper than that. We're looking for a quick connection. We're looking to feel loved for a minute, and it looks different for everybody, but it's a quick fix. It's not the long-term game. And I think because a lot of people feel like going into a relationship consciously with, ideas of what they want and boundaries for having that, people feel selfish. Like it's not like you shouldn't be able to do that, that you shouldn't have these standards and these boundaries and, in a sense, cut people out that don't fit it. It's okay to do those kinds of things. It's okay to have a list of things that you want in your life and that they're non-negotiables, because it will attract in the person who fits that, right? But we have to figure that out for ourselves first and not act off of the ulterior motive that's kind of deep within us.
Well, and that brings me back to the 3-column list that I was telling you about a minute ago. The 3 columns are, the first column is, what do I not want in a relationship again, right? We all can kind of sit and marinate in the what has been back there in my past that I don't ever want to see in a relationship again. That would go in that first column. The second column is, what do I want in a relationship, right? And that first column helps us to navigate the second column, right? What do I want in a relationship? I want communication. I want, whatever those things are for each individual. And the third column, I found the most important for me. And we've heard that from a lot of our clients as well. The third column is, what will I not stand for in a relationship from myself again? Right? And that's where we break down those habits and patterns that we have, if we've got the awareness around it, that we can take a look at and go, okay, for me, I was silent in relationships, right? I didn't speak up. I had lots of conversations in my head that my partners didn't know I was having, even though they were involved in the conversation in my head. So the number one thing for me was that I wouldn't ever not communicate again from my true self. And that list is an ongoing, evolving thing for folks as you're getting back out into the dating world and friending world. To really, I used to come home after dates and I had it hanging on my refrigerator. And I would go, and the minute I got home, I would go to that 3-column list and I would look, okay, where did I not step up? Where did I not speak up? Where did I not be authentic? What things?
Yeah, or did I?
Or did I?
Yeah.
And that tool was one of the big steps to finding that authentic self to go back into relationships with.
You see, I think you said something in there that is really important to touch on for a little bit, is that idea of self-talk. I feel like that's one of those things that I definitely learned and discovered is very vulnerable. It's very fragile, because when you're coming out of that constant, like, toxic environment where people are constantly feeding you all these different things, and Eventually, even though you stand there and you go, I got the suit of armor and I'm tough as nails, none of this stuff is going to affect me. It eventually wears you down, and it does change that vocabulary. So as you build that 3-column list up, I think that's something that is very important to be put on there, is to become aware of what that self-talk is. And you mentioned the idea of all those conversations that happened in your head that that none of your partners knew about. That is actually, I've discovered, to become one of the biggest and most powerful tools that we can utilize, is those quiet conversations. And it really helps to develop that picture of where it is you want to go, but it also helps you to prepare yourself in order to be ready for the moment that you're dropped into that picture.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like it gives you, you know, I feel like the reason people overlook red flags is because these things aren't in their vortex, right? They haven't looked at the red flags that they normally overlook, right? That's really what we're developing in this list. Is everyone's red flags are different, right? What you might consider red flags might not be what I consider red flags. What someone else considers red flags may not be what I consider red flags. And then there's some that are kind of universal to everybody as red flags, right? But they're different. So we have to look at that. And really, there are standards and boundaries. But where are we getting weak on those and lying to ourselves that we have to justify someone else's behavior because of the story we tell ourselves in our head, like you're saying, right? We have a lot of self-talk of, when justification happens, it's because we're talking ourselves out of it, right? We're having that conversation with ourselves in our head. So like you said, really being aware of when that self-talk comes up and what is it saying? Is it empowering? Is it helping you to have the relationship you really want? Or is it disempowering, coming from the fear side, telling you, oh, but this might be all you can get and it feels pretty good right now? Or remember last week, that was pretty awesome. You don't want to mess that up, right? So really having the awareness of what's in the present moment, not the story in our head.
And that can become a very very difficult line to walk, because we all want these different things, and we form this kind of like doomsday scenario around that story that we want to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we let those things go.
Yeah.
But slowing things down and bringing yourself back into the moment really is the key. That's what I feel puts the pin back in your hand in order to write the story.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with that. Right, you know a lot of us as humans, there's a point in our life where we're waiting to speak. We're not really listening,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not really present and actively listening in that moment. We're in that story in our head. Well, if she says this, I'm going to say that. And if she does it, I'm going to do. And we get caught up in that. And so one of the tools that we like to share is that first, it's awareness, right? Everything has to come back to the awareness state, that I'm aware that I'm having this thought habit, because that's what it is. It's a thought habit. My thought habits were always worst case scenario, right? They're going to do this, so I'll do it first. They're going to do that, so I'll get out first. And it was a roller coaster of that limiting self-talk. It was disempowering, as Nancy put it. What I found is when we are aware of it and we can bring ourselves back to that present moment, and is that true right now? Is it true in my experience right now? Or am I in the future or in the past of something that had happened? Our anxieties really come from the story we tell ourselves about what's going to happen, right? And that's not to take away that there are humans out there that have chemical deficiencies in their brains, and there's pieces of that bring on anxiety, but the majority of us can overcome that anxiousness by looking at, having the awareness around the story we tell ourselves and just asking a simple question, right?
No, I love that because, I remember being out in the woods back a couple weeks ago, right at the height of the rut, and standing there in the tree. All of a sudden, this younger buck come along, and he's all hyped up since his breeding season, and he's really let his guard down. I didn't end up shooting at him. I just kind of stood there and watched him and watched his behavior and thought about my own personal relationship with anxiety. And if you date that back to our ancestors, it was something that kept them alive. You
Mhm.
see that now in, for example, a deer, because everything around the corner is out there to eat them, right? They're on the menu for everything, but they don't let that stop them. If
Mhm.
they did, they wouldn't exist anymore. And especially with it being breeding season, the height of the rut, they let that guard down in order to do what is essentially their mission and their purpose, to continue the species.
Mhm.
But yet, in the back of their mind, even though their guard is down, they're prepared should danger come around the corner. Should they walk into something dangerous? Because had he seen or smelt me, I'm sure he wouldn't have come the way that he did, let alone hung out underneath my tree for a good 20 minutes. But, it's that developing that sense of releasing the story, because we are the only animal on this planet that tells ourselves stories. Everything else is just capable of living in the moment and going on with their course of nature. And I think that's a beautiful example of kind of walking through day to day, no matter what it is that you're trying to face. If it's developing a new friendship, a new relationship, or getting in front of people to speak, or anything like that. If you can eliminate that story, or at least learn to take control of the vocabulary and look at different influences for what those words are made of and the context that you use them, I feel like you kind of put yourself in that same position that, because I named him Longhorn, had himself in that morning. So
Yeah, and I love that. That story is so it's so right on for the way that we live. And within that, you know, that buck doesn't have to worry about the story of, is she going to like me? Is it going to last? Am I going to get hurt? Is there danger? And you're right. When we were millennial ago, cavemen, it was to make sure that we could survive. In today's world, our cult or our culture has sort of changed the idea around that, right? So we worry about everything.
right,
And that self talk, if we can be aware of it, we can drop into the space of where that buck is, right? By simply asking a question. Is it true? If we're aware of the story, we're aware of the mind chatter, the self talk, we can stop, take a breath. Is it true? Is it true what I'm telling myself in this moment? 99.8% of the time, it's not. And the more we practice that habit, as opposed to our old habit of following the story into the anxious thoughts, creating more worst case scenario, right? We go down that road. That's our habit. That was my habit for sure. Um, when I had anxiety, was to follow that thought habit down the little hole. Today, I'm aware of the thought habit. Now, that doesn't mean that the thoughts don't come. They do. And we're never going to catch the first thought. But if we can be aware of the thought and we can question it and then give our subconscious the answer, right? It's like, is that true? No, it's not true, because I don't know what someone's going to say, do, feel, act, or come with. So,
or maybe we haven't even asked the question. Like a lot of times we've got that going in our head. We think we know something so certain, and we haven't even asked the person yet, right? So again, we don't know if it's true, but we'll tell ourselves how wrong it is, and then that creates a whole another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, Seneca wrote it the best, that we all suffer more in our own minds than what reality actually has out there for us.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's kind of something that I've learned to play around a little bit with, and walking into situations where I know that the anxiety is going to spark up. And yeah, it kind of puts me, makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I'm ready to spring. But then again, there's the reality of, you're kind of here to do X, Y, and Z. You're here for a reason. You're only going to get one go at it. And this is kind of where I like to tie the one of my favorite Marcus Aurelius quotes into this, is where you're sitting there and you ask yourself, do you fear dying right now because of whatever this moment is or action that you're doing? And if the answer is yes, then you know what, it's something worth doing. And at times, anxiety does kind of make you feel like the next step is going to lead you to die.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, I'm getting to a point where when you get those kind of moments where it feels like a life and death moment, it's not worth just turning around, getting back in the truck, and going back to hide. It's kind of worth going forward, because there's some kind of adventure out there. You're not going to be in a moment to do something that nature didn't have planned out for you.
Yeah, I love that. And
Yeah.
and I love that you use the word adventure, right? We use adventure therapy to really grow through those moments, right? To grow through our comfort zone. And they don't have to be giant shifts. They can be small 1-degree shifts to step into that adventurous mindset, to step into that adventure of, is it, there's a big difference between that anxious mindset and true danger. And which one are we experiencing in this moment, and stepping through that? I like to call it false evidence appearing real. Step through that fear to find what's on the other side. Because again, through that, we're creating that adventure for ourselves, but we're also creating that growth within us to see that, that was false evidence appearing real, because I came through this and it was an adventure and it was a journey and it was an experience that I got to learn something from. I got to grow from it. And for me, I believe that's what this journey is about.
Yeah. And I think, oh no, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to just build on that and say, that's kind of like where a lot of my work has really come from, and where I found the most joy and adventure, is exploring the fact that, this outdoor skill set that I've developed by spending the time in the wilderness and doing all these different activities. It taught me this skill set that, up until a few years ago, I kind of took for granted. Throughout the adventure, you learn to embrace the suck factor. You build that endurance to think outside the box and, rely on yourself. And I never thought much about how that applied to the everyday world until there was a session of talk therapy where meditation was brought up. And, I've told this story many times and I still get a kick out of sharing it. But, when it was brought up, I was like, that's stupid. I'm not a Buddhist monk. I'm not shaving my head. I'm not going to sit there and go, for hours on end. So let's not even talk about it. And then after the session was over, I went out back and I grabbed my crossbow. And, the typical shooting pattern kicked in. The slowing of the breathing, slowing of the thoughts, the focus. And something snapped, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's meditation.
Yeah.
And that's when it all started to tie together for me, and realizing that there's such a confidence that you discover within the adventure. Whether you actually know what you're doing or not within the moment. Anytime you tackle anything out in the wilderness, it can become life and death, at the snap of a finger. So you learn how to trust yourself, and you learn how to adapt and overcome no matter what the scenario ends up being. And you can bring those things into not only how you navigate the world, but also into the relationships that you forge.
Yeah, I mean, those are essential life skills, right? To be able to adapt and overcome whatever situation gets thrown at you is like the essential life skills that we need to go through life, right? So learning them out there in a place where we feel like there's no other choice, because if we don't adapt and overcome, we die, right? It doesn't work
Right.
out. It's the same strategy, and you get to take it into real life, and I think that's the part that, until you do adventure, until you do something outdoors like that, you don't really get the connection, which is why we really promote adventure the way that we do, because it's the same strategy. But here in life, I guess because it's not such a quick like life or death in the situation, we get lost in the thought process about it instead of action, you know?
Definitely. And I don't want to just kind of throw it out there like if you're going into the wilderness, it's a matter of life and death. I mean, there are stages.
Yeah.
Which is one thing that I love about the wilderness is, a lot of people, when I talk to them initially from outside of the community, they're kind of scared. They're intimidated by it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it's like, well, go to the park and just walk around. Every park has some kind of woodland area.
Yeah.
Walk one of the trails, and then navigate up to somewhere that's designated for hiking and, camping and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get your feet wet, and you can learn how to build kind of a staircase. And, I feel like that ties into life in general. And whether it's within the outdoor community, and that's the wilderness adventure part, or it's something as simple as, auto repair or whatever other passions you have in life, you can apply what you're doing in your recreation time into the moments in life that really help to propel you to go forward.
Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
love that.
Yep.
We've had one particular client comes to mind who couldn't go outside of their house,
Mm-hmm.
and we promote adventure and adventure therapy, right? We take people on retreats where we rappel down waterfalls, and it doesn't have to be that big. We lived on a sailboat for a long time, so I talk about 1 degree shifts and how a 1 degree shift on a compass in one step is not very big.
Mm-hmm.
1 degree shift on your compass in one step is not very big. But over 4 miles, that 1 degree shift can be way off course or can be dead on course, right? Depending on
Right.
how we do that. And the 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 place that adventure brings us in that present moment is really where that growth is. So for this particular client, the adventure therapy was literally to stand at her storm door, right, her glass door instead of the big door, right? Just open the door and look outside at night, right? That was just step one. Step two was to open the door at night. Just look outside and then close the door. Step three was to stand on her front stoop, her front porch for a minute, 1 minute, go back in the house, right? This woman now is like
Can go walking at
hiking.
night.
She's walking in cities like London and New York. But if we would have said, go stand on a street in New York City, the anxiety, the fears would have just closed her down, would have never taken her to that growth space. So it is about those 1 degree shifts, those small pieces that we can do. We have clients just walk around their neighborhood. Just walk around the neighborhood and look at the trees and look at the birds. And
well, it's teaching you how to work through anxiety, right? Any kind of adventure brings on the feeling of anxiousness, right? Because we get an idea about what's going to happen. So we start freaking out in our head. But like you said before, it's realizing that freak out, the story we're telling ourselves, is not actually true. Like the first time I went rock climbing, I was only like 10 feet off the ground, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to fall. I can't move. I can't this. And what if I fall? I'm going to break my leg. And, and he helped me, Scott helped me with working through that mind chatter of like, the gear is safe. We talked about the gear. I showed you the gear, like everything's good, and gave me answers to the mind chatter I was having. But if I didn't give my mind chatter answers, I'd be living in that space, creating that like, the worst is going to happen. So when we do it in 1 degree shifts, it creates it in like little minimal pieces. And then we get to see that what we're telling ourselves is false when we step through it, and we go, oh, okay, so what I said was false. And then we bring it up a notch, and then we bring it up a notch. And every time you get to see that mind chatter, that fear, is the false evidence appearing real. It's not actually true. And then the growth comes when we actually step through it.
Yeah, it's almost like that idea of try it before you buy it. Because, you get caught up in that like scary anxiety feeling like, hey, if I'm going to walk out there in the wilderness with whatever I throw in my backpack, I don't know how to use it. So what happens if I've actually got to get out there and use it? Set it up in the backyard. Pitch your tent. After you've got it in your hand, go out back and set it up. Play around with it. A lot of life as you're growing up, a lot of life skills that you learn come out of play, right? So I don't know at what stage that idea of play changes or disappears, but there's nothing wrong with getting back to that concept of learning through play.
Oh, I cannot agree with you more.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't have said it any better. And I'll tell you where it gets lost, because I have figured that piece out. It gets lost through our experiences. It gets lost through our limiting beliefs. It gets lost through other people's limiting beliefs about what we're capable of doing. And as children is where it starts, right? I remember always watching people with children and chasing them around like, oh, don't get up there. Don't get on the chair. Don't get on the couch. Don't get up here. Don't climb that. Don't do this. And all of a sudden you've got an adult who is scared to stand on a 1 foot off the ground bench, right? Because they have this fear that was instilled in them from 0 to 11 because of the limiting beliefs that are put in. Oh, don't climb that tree. You're going to break your arm. Don't pick up that BB gun. You're going to shoot your eye out. Don't, right? It's all of these things that we're taught from growing up. So one of the things, because I'm a rock climber, one of the things that I did with my son was that every time he wanted to climb something, I allowed him. But the caveat to that, right? I wasn't like a willy-nilly dad, like, oh yeah, he's 2 years old, whatever. It was, there was a conversation about it. And then, hey, if you're going to climb that thing, just come get me, right? I have a lot of ladders. I do lots of work. And it's like I'd have a 12-step set up in the backyard. And he would go look at it and come and say, I want to climb up. Okay, great. And I would spot him and I would make it as safe as you possibly can, right? Like,
right.
There's, life is going to be life. But what it taught him is that he doesn't have to be afraid of everything out there. He can have that playtime even as an adult. And that's really, I feel like, getting back to that inner child and allowing them to have that play. Now that we're adults, we get to really overcome those limits. And again, like you said, it's the small things that lead to
Right.
the big things.
I think you hit on something that is actually really worth noting is the fact that, you go through not only growing up, you're taught things and you experience things, but throughout life, you experience things that leave you with those negative setbacks. And, for example, you go through a situation and all of a sudden you come out the other side and maybe anxiety is kind of running rampant and you're really struggling to have to relearn how to do certain things. There is no shame in that, though. It's an opportunity that you should look at and be grateful that you get because you get to rebuild it not only in the shape and form that you want, but you get to build it stronger.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and differently. I think that's part of the biggest gift is when we get to realize that our anxiety is coming up because we're looking at a situation thinking that it's going to be the same thing as it was in the past. So we get anxious about it, right? And again, we start telling that story. But when we can look at it as a brand new situation, even if it looks really, really similar to the past, it's not. And find the different and look at it as different and enter into it as the present moment, not from past hurts and not from past experiences. And then we get to have a new outcome, right? And again, those baby steps, but it is a gift.
Well,
absolutely.
And just to put that into context of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
I was gun shy, to say the least, about getting into another relationship, right? After my past hurts, after my past failed relationships. And I think that that's a big one well, I know it is for our clients and for most people who have had any kind of, um, rough relationship journey, if you will. And we, people call it baggage, right? Oh, I bring baggage to this relationship. And it's like, well, why not just put it down and leave it with that last relationship, right? We can leave that baggage with over there, put it down, and really create a new space for ourselves with what we learned from that failed relationship, right? And then we become better, right? I have become better at relationships because I've learned from my past hurts, my past failures, my past uh, what
Traumas.
traumas and
Yeah.
well, and what I did in that, right? What my habits were,
Yeah,
and learning from that for me created a space of better, right? I hear a lot of people go, oh, I want to get back to what that was. No, you don't. You want to get better. You want to get better at this journey of relationships. And it's possible. It's possible for everybody, no matter how many failed marriages, failed relationships, if we want to look at it as failure, right? I look at it as research and development. Because without the research and development, I wouldn't have the enlightened relationship that I have today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, see, I love the idea that, I think back to like the very first stages of this journey for me or over the past few years. And one thing that, I always felt kind of like stupid when somebody said to me was, congratulations, it's a new day, it's a new beginning. And it took a while for my head to really wrap around that idea that like every day is literally a brand new start. And I think a lot of that understanding came from reading a lot of Seneca's writings and how he wrote a lot about how after you lived a moment, it'll never come back. It'll never be the same because, once you lived it, you hand it over to death. and therefore you've got a new beginning each and every step that you take. And through that principle, I think it builds like that framework for like a new mindset that leads you ultimately to the idea of a authentic and enlightening kind of relationship. It puts you in a position to be able to actually engage in that sphere.
Yeah, we call it the clean slate method.
There you go.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Because it's easy to hold on to all of the stuff, right? Where our culture kind of almost dictates that we carry it around. But the fact of the matter is, like you just said, it's not only every day, and I'm glad that you were specific about that.
Yeah.
It is with each step,
Moment
right?
by moment.
Because in a moment, right, you can have this this argument or whatever it is, right? Whatever we want to put a meaning on, whether it's good or bad or right or wrong, but the fact of the matter is that we get to choose the next choice, and then the next choice, and the next choice. If we're aware that as humans, everything is a choice. And for me, the minute I really realized that, used my real eyes to see it, not the filters that I used to see life through, but when I realized that I had a choice in every moment. I had a choice to argue back. I had a choice to become angry. Or I had a choice to walk away. I had a choice to use a different tone, a different word, um, a different space to have whatever the experience was. Because the fact of the matter is that if it's happening for you, not to you, if it's happening for you, and everything happens for you and not to you, I believe. If it's happening for you, it's supposed to, right? And we get caught up in thinking that we have control over more than our emotions and our thought habit. We think we have control over God or the universe, right? How many times have people woken up and gone, it shouldn't be raining? Like, who's like, that's not my business. That's God's or the universe, whatever you believe in. Like, I have no control over that. Just like I have no control over your emotions or how you feel, right? How many times have somebody said, you made me feel angry, you made me mad, you made me feel whatever, right? When we get to the point to understand that that's our choice and that no human being except for ourselves can make ourselves feel anything, it's like opens up a world of joy. And
well, it's a big weight off our shoulders when we realize like we don't have such power over
right.
Like, we can't make everybody happy. Like there's a lot of, I was one of them for a long time thinking, you wanted to make the room happy, you wanted to make sure everyone was good, and you're trying to like make everyone okay. And that's a lot of pressure to come in with. And when you let go of that and you realize I could stand on my head and it's not going to make this person happy, right? It takes that pressure off of like, that's their thing. The reason that they're offended or they're mad or they're sad or they're upset, that's their thing. I can be there as a support to talk them through it, but I can't make them think differently or feel differently. And that's a big weight off for a lot of people when we remove that giant thing that we think we have control over.
That's very true. I know I've experienced a lot of that along my journey as well. So as we kind of come toward the end of this, I've got one question that I love to ask everybody after I get them all good and warmed up. I know I didn't mention it beforehand, but from the clean slate all the way back to the messy part of the trail where it began. You both got to leave us with some words of wisdom and inspiration.
Mm.
Mm.
So for me, it's really about change the story and change your life, because the story dictates the actions that we take. So if my story is I'm unlovable, all my actions are from that place, right? But if I change that story to I am pure love, it changes the actions and the choices that I make on a daily basis, on a moment to moment basis, which creates for me a better life, a better relationship, a better everything.
Mm. Yeah, and to piggyback on top of that, because a lot of people might hear that and be like, well, that's all fine and dandy, but I can't just change the way I think about things. Like, it's just who I am. But it's a habit. The way you think is just a habit. You've been thinking that way for however old you are. If you're 30, it's been 30 years. If you're 40, it's been 40 years. That's a long time to ingrain your brain to create a habit. And that's all that it is. So if you start with 1 degree shifts every day or every time you can think it, to just reframe that story, that when you notice it, you'll start to build a new thought habit and rewire your brain to think differently, because that's what we're doing. It's literally rewiring the neural pathways in your brain to think differently. And that's really the bottom, most basic line of it. So 1 degree shifts of just slowly build that new habit, starting now to the next 40 years and the next 30 years to build that habit.
It's just that one simple little thing each day that
Yes.
continues to carry us forward.
Yeah.
And as you navigate that little trek every day, it's putting those thoughts and those ideas up for review, whether it's journaling, talking about it to yourself with those self talks, or talking to others, and just, you know, constantly pivoting and learning to evolve with what life puts in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I love the self talk part, that investigation of the thought habit.
Mm-hmm.
If we
Right?
can be aware of, where is my thought habit? Am I always thinking of the worst case scenario?
Mm-hmm.
And can I switch it one time in a day, 2 times in a week?
Mm-hmm.
Can I shift it to the best case scenario?
And when you do, celebrate.
Yeah.
Don't forget to celebrate, guys.
Yes.
Reward yourself for thinking differently, because that's big.
And you'll find that sooner than later, you will have a new thought habit. And the best case scenario will pop in front first.
Mm-hmm.
And
you'll surprise yourself.
You will surprise yourself.
Yeah, you definitely will. I know I have. So, as we do come to the end of this, you got to let people know how they can get in touch with you and find out what all you got going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the best way to get in touch with us is you can put into Google Scott and Nancy, and it'll pull up our website, Facebook, Instagram. Our website is Scott and Nancy Kiesling, but honestly, Google's the easiest way. Luckily, there's not many Scott and Nancy's out there, so it'll pull up all our contacts.
Yeah, and if you just type in Scott and Nancy Adventure,
yeah,
you'll find us.
Yeah. And as far as what we have going on, we really wanted to give your audience a gift, which we'll give to you after the show, Mike. But a lot of times we have to look at our life to see, where are we being adventurous? Where are we stepping outside our comfort zone and bringing that play back into our life? So we have a little adventure assessment that we give to people to kind of see that. And so you can kind of see where you are on the scale of still being playful and bringing adventure and stepping yourself out of your comfort zone each day.
And building more of that playful self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'd love to gift that to your audience. And as far as other stuff going on, probably the best thing is to just follow us on Facebook and our website.
Yeah, I mean, we have a enlightened relationship workshop coming up on February 5th.
Mm-hmm.
We have an adventure therapy retreat going to Costa Rica in June. So we've always got something going on in the adventure realm.
Yeah. So
Well, Scott, Nancy, I really greatly appreciate you guys sitting down and doing this. Definitely given me a lot to think about and probably change some of my thought patterns as well. So thank you.
It's our
You're
pleasure. Thanks for
welcome.
having us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.